Gateway Airport EA/EIR project update. Just want to go through initially, you can see on the screen, introductions. So my name is Katie Service. I am the airport manager for Cape Cod Gateway Airport. And I'm going to ask our staff who is here from the airport to also stand up. We have Matt Ilya, the assistant airport manager, Christina Lounsbury, our noise coordinator and security officer. And then I'm going to hand it over to Epsilon, who is the environmental firm that is working on the draft EA. Alyssa, for you to mention your team.
Good evening. My name is Alyssa Jacobs. I am a principal.
Can I interrupt the service first, please? Is it a representative from the FAA in the state here also?
Mr. Phelan, we'll get through the introductions and you will see that their FAA is here. Thank you. Go ahead, Alyssa.
I am the project manager for the environmental assessment and environmental impact report. With me this evening, I have Nate Rotting, environmental planner, Ryan Callahan, acoustic engineer. And I'll turn it over to Cheryl to introduce herself and her team.
Hi, I'm Cheryl Quain. I'm with the FAA, and I've got a couple of colleagues here with me as well. I'm the environmental protection specialist for Airports New England. I'm here with Colleen Mayu, who is our planner, and Luke Garrison, who is Manager of Safety and Standards.
Thank you very much. We also have a few of our commissioners that are here as well. For the agenda tonight, we are going to go over the project timeline, topics and issues that have been brought to our attention through the environmental notification form process and the comments that were received to date. Next steps and how to comment on the environmental assessment and the environmental impact report, and how to submit your comments, and then also our questions and answers in a moderated format and how we are going to deal with that this evening. So this is our community outreach meeting number 4. This is not a typical meeting that we've had for this type of meeting or for this type of project. This is actually an extra meeting that we're holding because of comments that we received from the public. We've done 2 such extra meetings, and you'll see that in a moment in the timeline. But this is the 4th meeting in regards to the projects that we're proposing at the airport. We had an earlier meeting today that was a virtual component of the meeting to give the community an opportunity to join us virtually or to come out physically in person to the meeting. So the meeting goals for tonight are to discuss the issues that were commonly voiced during the past meetings in response to the environmental notification form, to provide an opportunity to answer your questions. Like I said, it is a moderated meeting. We're going to stop at certain points in time during the meeting, and so you can ask your questions. There's comment cards that are available. The FAA will also go through the process of how you submit comments. We want the comments to be substantive comments based on CEQ guidance and part of the NEPA and MEPA process. And again, we'll go through that with you, what's required by the state and the federal government. Convey information on the role and the benefits of the airport and beyond, and then continue to receive feedback and engage the community throughout the entire process. Alyssa, do you want to go over the question and format?
Sure. So this evening, we're going to be having a moderated meeting. And so we've requested that community members have the opportunity, they could submit questions in advance. And then we also have comment cards for questions and comments. And this is what we will be taking questions and comments from the community here tonight, as well as comments and questions we've already received via our email address. As Katie noted, we will be stopping periodically to... I'm sorry. Can I finish, please? This.
I asked you if you were going to allow any questions that haven't been written down on the comment.
Ma'am, if I had just been able to speak my next sentence, I would have addressed that. So I think it's really would be helpful if we can speak and we are continuing to answer questions you're about to ask. So as I noted, Katie will be stopping periodically to address the written comments that we've received as it pertains to the subjects that we've just addressed in the presentation. And then at the end of the meeting, there will be an opportunity to ask additional comments or ask additional questions. I think we want to make sure that the questions are focused to the content of the meeting and the purpose of the environmental documentation. Written comments are strongly encouraged during the MIPA and NEPA review process. And those will be considered part of the public document.
Excuse me, point of order, Melissa.
Yes, sir.
I was unable to make a written comment, but I have a statement. The file is too big for me to submit, but if I could bring it to the table,
I would note that
this is the 2,300 pages that were dumped on the public. This represents the 2,300 pages of information that we're expected to go through of technical jargon written by engineers, written by lawyers, for engineers and lawyers. I can't disseminate that from the FAA. I hope you please do your diligence because we don't understand those 2,300 pages.
But you haven't read it yet.
I'm sorry?
You haven't read it yet?
I've been unable to get through it. I spent 2 hours today, and I probably got through 50 pages. It's just too technical for the public, someone like myself, to understand. I'm relying on you, because I don't trust the airport. Thank you.
Thank you. As I would like to point out, so we're accepting the comments tonight, but as it relates to the formal document that Mr. Phelan so kindly printed out for all of us to look at, are those comments, there'll be a public comment period for written comments to be to the agency. So the anticipation of this evening is not necessarily to address the document itself, but to, as Katie noted, the concerns and issues generally that have been brought up over the course of our past 6 months of effort. We've also provided a handout detailing all of these timeframes, as well as how to make these comments official to the federal and state agencies. Merely speaking tonight is not an official comment.
Thank you, Alyssa. The speakers will cover a number of topics that are listed on the agenda. We will go over topics that have been brought to our attention that are of most concern to the community. The documents that may have been made available on the airport's website are made in advance of the document that will be provided through the state, through the MIPA office. That was provided to our community so they have an advanced look at the documents and at the drafts that they can review. And the MIPA process will start with a delivery of the documents on the 15th of December and will be available for public consumption on the 22nd. So we gave our community an advance documentation review by putting it on our website on Saturday. After the presentation, time will be provided for questions and answers. Obviously, please use your comment cards, so as we're talking, you have a moment to jot down what your questions are. So for instance, when we're going over perhaps the runway documentation, if you have a question on the runway itself, you can jot down your comments. We'll take a pause and we'll ask some questions. The project team will address those questions. For any follow-up questions, just please state your name and your relationship to the project before your question, and then we'll proceed forward through the entire presentation. Next, we're going to go over is the project timeline and community outreach. I'm going to have Alyssa cover this because it can be confusing. We have multiple agencies that we need to respond to and report to. We have state, we have local, we have federal agencies, and they all require different types of documentation. So I'll ask Alyssa to walk through that timeline.
Sure. So as Katie noted, we are following the regulatory required processes for both a state and federal process. Under the state is the Massachusetts Environmental Policy Act and their regulations. Under the federal guidance, it's the federal National Environmental Policy Act. We have to follow appropriate public notice guidelines, public meeting guidelines, as well as documentation. So we started this process in October of 2022 with our first initial public outreach meeting and notification to the community. This notification included specific reaching out to our environmental justice communities, as well as a postcard mailing to all households within 5 miles of the airport. That was over 30,000 addresses. We submitted our first document called an environmental notification form in November of 2022, and that was the first public document. During that comment period, MEPA, the state agency, held a site visit at the airport as well as a virtual hearing to review the project and to review the environmental impacts associated. The MEPA process for that environmental notification form concluded with the issuance of what's called a certificate from the secretary. And that certificate outlaid the scope of what's required for the state required environmental impact report. We held a we had a third public meeting. This was another meeting that was not required by the regulations, but we held it in June to document our process since the scope on the environmental notification form was issued. And now here we are at public meeting number 4. So on the slide, you'll see the yellow dots are regulatory required meetings, and the teal colored dots are these additional public meetings that we are holding. On December 15th, we will be submitting this draft environmental assessment. That's the NEPA component, and the environmental impact report. It's going to a very wide distribution list as required by both the FAA and the state government. As Katie noted, a preview was posted on the public website, but this becomes an official submittal once we submit it to MEPA and FAA. There is a public comment period, and the airport has going to be requesting that the public comment period be extended, and so that will go from December 22nd through February 9th, 2024. Following the close of the comment period, and review of the document by MEPA, they will issue a certificate, and that will outline the scope of what is required for our final environmental assessment and impact report, taking into consideration all public comments and questions, as well as agency comments and questions. We anticipate submitting that final document in summer 2024, followed by a final certificate from the state agency, as well as a determination from FAA. And at that point, we'll be able to begin our regional review process through the Cape Cod Commission in accordance with the regional policy plan.
So the next step for the topics covered, we're going to go over the airport role with community and economic benefits. We have a lot of airport users that have commented on the use of the airport and what it means to them to use the airport. So we feel that it's necessary to identify their concerns as well. Runway extension and the proposed action, that was one of the topics that was brought to our attention of being concerned from the community. Noise that's associated with that proposed action and the regulatory requirements that we adhere to from a federal standpoint. An alternative as Joint Base Cape Cod and what that looks like. Water quality and PFAS. I will note here that we do have a future PFAS meeting that's coming up on the 18th, so that's next Monday at 6 o'clock at the airport. That meeting has more detail for PFAS and how the airport has dealt with PFAS. It is part of the public involvement plan, and that is a planned process that we have gone through with the Department of Environmental Protection. We have held 2 previous meetings to that PFAS meeting to let the community know what we were doing in regards to our response. But this is an official DEP meeting on the 18th. And then we'll also go over air quality tonight. So moving on to the airport, the airport's role, community, and economic benefit. The airport is a commercial transportation hub for the residents of the town of Barnstable and Cape Cod. We meet the regional demand for air transportation, both commercial and private transportation. We do have a variety of users, so you can see up there on the screen, we do have some photographs of our users. They include medical evacuation, the Coast Guard, military, old vintage aircraft that have come to the airport on numerous occasions, and our business jet aircraft as well as JetBlue and soon-to-come American Airlines in June of next year. We have year-round residents that use this airport on a regular basis. We have employees that transition to and from Nantucket and the Vineyard, such as contractors, healthcare workers, hospitality, and others. We have, like I said, medical evacuation, where there's multiple flights per week in close proximity to Cape Cod Hospital, which is where we are. We're very close to Cape Cod Hospital to receive ambulance service to and from the airport to those medical evacuation vehicles. Military and Coast Guard, visitors and businesses that utilize the airport, summer residents that pay annual taxes within the 15 towns of Cape Cod, the FAA, as well as the Transportation Security Administration. This slide shows the airport's role from an economic benefit. Massachusetts Department of Transportation Aeronautics Division did this analysis back in January of 2019. They are in the process of updating this document, but this shows the commercial service airports, Barnstable, Hyannis being one of them, Cape Cod Gateway Airport being one of them. We employ 1,724 people at the airport, with over 65 businesses that are located at the airport. We have a total payroll of just over 73 million and a total output of 157 million. Many companies that are at the airport have been here for many, many years. They've supported and raised their families here on Cape Cod because of the airport. Like I said, the airport is an important source of local jobs and economic activity with a workforce that's just over 1,700 people. It is home to over 65 businesses and private users, such as Cape Air, who has been at the airport for over 33 years. Atlantic Aviation, who has been at the airport for over 20 years. They've changed their name 3 times, but they are now Atlantic Aviation. They were once Retrix, then Ross, now Atlantic, but it's the same company, same people work there. Griffin Avionics has been at the airport for over 40 years. And then again, we do have staff from the Federal Aviation Administration as well as the Transportation Security Administration that are at the airport. We also try to host many community-based events. We've tried to introduce our youth on Cape Cod to aviation to give them an opportunity to learn more about the industry. We have an annual Young Eagles program that gives a free flight to kids ages 8 through 17. We do that annually. We have an annual Student Aviation Career Day, and I'll tell you that since we started that Aviation Career Day, we're going into our 4th year in 2024. We have had many student interns that come from high schools here on the Cape. We have one student that's now from Barnstable High School. We have another student coming on board with us in January from Monomoy. So we have a lot of students that have been able to come to the airport and learn about different aspects of the industry. In fact, one of our most recent interns is on the front page of the Bridgewater State University magazine. She's a graduate of Barnstable High School. She came to the airport and did her internship, and now she's getting her pilot's license. And she's been featured on the front of that magazine this month. We have an annual community event called A Great Day at the Gateway, in which we have a lot of opportunity for you not only to learn more about aviation in general, but to learn about what the airport does, to meet our staff, to meet the employees that are there, and have an opportunity to thank our military, because we combine that with a dedication to our military as well. We also have girls in aviation events, and we have scout sleepovers in the terminal. It's called a Night at the Terminal, where we have a dedicated staff that educate those scouts. We provide a curriculum for them for a 2-day event where they're learning everything they possibly can learn within 2 days about the aviation industry. So the airport is more than just an airport. We try to do a lot of outreach with our community. We have a lot of fun with our community. The top left picture is a photograph of the scouts that slept over this past March of 2023. The photograph in the middle is students who are going to Cape Cod Community College to learn about aviation mechanics and to become A&P mechanics, airframe and power plant mechanics. The photo on the top right is a kid that came to our Great Day at the Gateway event. And was able to jump into all of the different vehicles that were located as static displays. And the pictures on the bottom are different events that we've had at the airport, including events that we have with our chambers. Now I'd like to move on to the portion where we'll have the FAA speak. Our contingent from MassDOT Aeronautics has not arrived yet. He notified to me that he's going to be a little bit late, but I can cover those pieces as well. I don't know if you need that.
The role of the aviation FAA in this project, we have our main goals, our main oversight is approving the airport layout plan. When the airport decides that they're going to put certain features on the airport, we make sure it's done in a safe manner. And we also have a funding mechanism, our grant program, the Airport Improvement Program that we oversee. So that is the federal connection for this project. It is a project that is going to change their airport layout plan, and they will be seeking federal funding for it.
In regards to MassDOT Aeronautics, just it's very similar. MassDOT Aeronautics helps maintain and provide assistance to 35 public use airports within the state. And they have essentially the same goals and initiatives as the FAA, however, on a state level. They do assist us with grant funding for various projects as well, and they do oversee a project such as this one when it comes to the public comment and the aspects of the environmental assessment that we're setting forth for this particular project.
So for the National Environmental Policy Act, the environmental assessment that's being prepared, the FAA is going to be reviewing the actions, and if the federal determination is that there's no significant impact, we will be approving the airport layout plan, and that is our environmental determination. The FAA also has a role of making sure that the design standards are up to what the FAA is requesting. We also have a role when providing grant monies or airport layout plan decisions that the projects are reasonably needed. Not every airport in the country can ask for a runway extension. Not everybody can ask and get a, 4-story terminal with all the bells and whistles. And then we also, the FAA has oversight of changing the airport's operation certification manual, in addition to, like what I said, issuing grants. So where we go from here, the FAA particularly, we have conditionally approved the airport's layout plan, and that condition is contingent on the completion of a NEPA process. So this project was a little too big for a categorical exclusion, which is a series of actions where we know that the impacts are not going to be significant. It is not an environmental impact statement where we know that the impacts are significant. We're right in the middle at the environmental assessment stage where we will measure all of the impacts that we're seeing against certain already established thresholds that appear in our FAA order. What triggered the requirement for an EA was the request for the change to the airport layout plan and the grant funding. And once we receive a final decision on the environmental assessment, it's not until that point until the project could move forward. We will not issue more grant funding for design and permitting or actual construction of the process until the NEPA process is complete. About the FAA's role in the NEPA document, we fund the project, the environmental assessment, the report itself, but we do not prepare the project itself. We do have oversight to make sure that it is legally defensible, that it complies with all of the federal and state laws that it needs to. And then at the end, it is the FAA's responsibility to make a determination of finding on the document, either a finding of no significant impact or there are significant impacts that can't be mitigated, and we would move on to an environmental impact statement.
Thank you, Cheryl. In regards to the last time we had a public document, it was the environmental notification form in which we received 21 comments Of those 21 comments, like I said, the vast majority outlined or identified topics that we're discussing here tonight, one in which is the runway extension. Runway 1533, and I will take a pause after these slides for the runway so we can get those comment cards or answer some of the questions that you may have. The runway 1533 extension, the current length is 5,255 feet. The master plan identified a preferred alternative. It was called alternative number 4. That alternative was depicted after we exhausted about 29 alternatives that we looked at the airport. It recommended a total runway length of 6,550 feet by adding 895 feet to the runway 15N, that's closest to Independence Park. So that's this area right here. And then it also recommended 400 feet at the opposite end, runway 33. Moving forward to this process, the runway extension, it's all proposed on existing airport property, so it will exist within the 639 acres that the airport owns. We used FAA methodologies to determine what the range of runway lengths should be based on the range of aircraft that use the airport today. We looked at additional runway length to allow for the existing aircraft to operate more safely, to meet FAA design standards that use the airport, again, like I said today, and you'll see in a couple of slides where we identify that. And we also looked at the proposed changes that would be needed for future commercial aircraft that will be using the airport. So additional runway length responds to the industry trends that we're seeing. So there's a term in the aviation industry called upgauging. Upgauging is when the airline industry looks at an aircraft and they say, we can fit more bodies on one aircraft versus 2 aircraft. This has been happening since about the late 90s, where many airlines are moving into larger aircraft. This you've probably seen where many airports had regional aircraft that were operating different routes, where they had it in a 45, 25 passenger aircraft. Now we're seeing a lot of those regional aircraft fleets go away. Many of the airlines are reducing those numbers. There's only a handful of airlines that are keeping a portion of that regional fleet. So we're seeing this across the industry. We're not the only airport that has seen that. So there are additional runway lengths that have taken place within Massachusetts in the past few years, including Pittsfield, Fitchburg, Marshfield, New Bedford, Plymouth, and Norwood. Of all those airports, Marshfield is a little bit smaller, but of all those airports, we are very close in the types of aircraft that we accommodate for the different types of fleets of aircraft that, and the family of aircraft that uses our airports. That's the same across the board for all of those other airports as well, and they have completed runway extensions. And looking at this airport in particular, we looked at the purpose and need for the airport. We wanted to provide a reasonable and balanced approach as we looked at what our needs were for the airport, meaning that as an airport, I'm obligated to look at what my users need, what the users need at the airport, who are the types of users, what type of aircraft fly in and out of the property, what are their needs. I also have to balance that with what the community needs are. So in looking at the runway length requirement, when we started to look at this in the master plan, I said to our team that was working at that time, look at how we can accommodate the needs of our users, but do it within airport property boundaries. Can we still do it? Can we still accommodate what we need to accommodate to meet those needs, but also reduce what that potential impact could be to the surrounding community? That's a balanced approach. So we first looked at our critical aircraft. We identified the critical aircraft that are typically using the airport on a regular basis. What you see on the screen is the Bombardier Global Express on the photograph to the lower left. Gulfstream aircraft is next, the Dassault Falcon, and the Embraer E190 that JetBlue uses seasonally to come to the airport. That's our mix or family of aircraft that we use so that we can identify what the runway length would need to be for those aircraft. I'm going to bounce back and forth between this slide a couple of times because there's a few slides after this that relate back to this slide, so I'll come back to this in a few moments. So if you look at this table, the first column that you see is the airport master plan analysis that was done. Over on the left-hand side are the aircraft, or the family of aircraft, the aircraft that I just mentioned, plus 2 future commercial aircraft, the A220 and the A320. So we put those aircraft in there because we know that JetBlue is transitioning out of their E190 aircraft, and they're moving to the A220. In fact, during the last meeting in June, you all saw a letter that JetBlue had sent to us indicating this transition that they will do of their aircraft. But if you notice from that slide, if you look to the column to the right, which is the environmental assessment of this process, where we took a deeper dive into those runway lengths, you'll notice that the A220 isn't the aircraft that needs the longest runway. The aircraft that needs the longest runway are the existing fleet of aircraft that already use the facility in our mix. When we started to look at the environmental assessment in the runway length and got some comments back from the public, one such comment being that they didn't want to see an extension occur on the approach end of runway 33. We heard that time and time again from our community. We asked our team to take a look at it once we heard that comment to see, is there any way that we can still accommodate what we need to accommodate if we were to remove that 400 feet? And the answer was yes. We can still accommodate the users of the field by looking at something that was less than the 6,550 feet that was originally identified in the master plan to something that is a little bit less. Now, I have there in the bubbles information about what the airport is obligated to do. We're obligated to look at the fleet, the family of aircraft that utilize our facility, which is what we did. We can't look at any one entity, so we looked at who uses the facility today and who has potential to use the facility in the future. We also took a look at what the typical distance would be that these aircraft would be flying. We thought that 1,500 nautical miles would be something that would be consistent and realistic. We're probably not going to fly straight to, in a passenger jet, straight to California, but we do know that most of our residents that are leaving Cape Cod are going to Florida. The top destinations and airports that we looked at for Cape Cod residents is going to Florida. So this table here is the top 15 destinations. I just identified the top 4, because if not, you wouldn't be able to see everything that's in the table. These are passengers who live on Cape Cod and who are traveling to a domestic airport by using another airport such as Boston or Providence. Throughout all quarters, that top line there, the vast majority, almost 20,000 Cape Cod residents are flying to Orlando year-round. Every quarter of the year, they're going to Orlando. If we look at the ranking number 2, we have Fort Lauderdale as a high market, DCA, which that will be fulfilled by American coming in June, Chicago, and again, Fort Lauderdale. So Fort Lauderdale has a lot of capacity in which they are taking passengers from Cape Cod to that airport. We're also looking at Southwest Florida, or otherwise known as Fort Myers. Fort Myers is in the number 3 ranking. Again, you see Fort Lauderdale there again, DCA, Chicago, about nearly 10,000 of our Cape Cod residents that are going to those destinations. And then lastly, I show Tampa, Chicago, Los Angeles, and again, Fort Lauderdale as almost 9,000 passengers that are going from Cape Cod to those destinations. We have other destinations, but it's interesting to see that the top destinations happen to be Florida. That's what we're hearing from users of the airport on time and time again, looking for those destinations to those Florida markets right from Hyannis. So that's nearly 40,000 Cape Cod residents that fly the top 4 Florida destinations on a year-round basis. So going back to this slide again, when you look at the environmental assessment, the column on the furthest right, that's looking at a little bit more realistically of a nautical mile, a distance that we would most likely see these aircraft flying. From here to Florida, depending on the airport, it's about 1,000 nautical miles. So the 1,500 nautical mile seems consistent with looking at reality of what could potentially happen at Cape Cod Gateway. With that, we looked at the red line on this graph. On the left-hand side, it shows the aircraft that were in that table. The red line shows the existing runway length of 5,255 feet. The purple dotted line to the right of that is the master plan runway length that was identified. And from the EA standpoint and from comments that we received, we're coming somewhere in the middle. So when we look at the runway extension, this is truly our balanced approach. I have a couple of slides on this, and then I'm going to open it up for comment card questions. So again, 29 alternatives were identified within the master plan to look at this runway extension. We reviewed all of those analyses again. We looked at the preferred alternative that came out of the master plan and further refined it. We looked at an analysis of airport users' needs and the needs and comments from the community so that we can identify a balanced approach. We have to, as an airport, we're obligated to look at what our users need, but we're also obligated to have a balanced approach for our community. We understand that. So we went with the 895-foot extension on the runway 15 end only and eliminated the 400 feet on the opposite end, runway 33. This still allows the airport to meet the needs of its users, but again, it balances with the community. We did this by implementing design features that the FAA allows us to implement, allowing for pavement of critical operations such as a takeoff to occur, but with declared distances, and I'll explain that in the next slide. So again, the current runway length is 5,255 feet. We're proposing an extension on the runway 15 end only at 895 feet for a total overall length of usable pavement of 6,150 feet. Again, eliminating 400 feet on the 33 end. So concessions that we have made in the overall proposed design so that we can meet that balanced approach, it meets some of the needs of the airport, it meets some of the needs of the community, and that's how we have to view this. The airport, again, those 29 alternatives that we looked at, most likely, most pilots would want to use all of the available new pavement length for operations. We found ways that we could still meet their needs through the use of declared distances. It means that it's not an ideal alternative for pilots, but it is a concession that can be made because it meets the intent of the airport and also helps to reduce some of those community impacts. So declared distances are specific lengths on the runway that are published for aircraft operations, specifically when taking off or landing. They define those landing and those takeoff distances that are available for a pilot's use. So this is what it looks like. Option A. Option A is what every pilot wants to see. They want to see that you're using your optimal runway pavement available to you, all of the runway. Option B is the option that we went to for this EA and this environmental impact report. Option B is less than optimal for a typical pilot and for an airport because it doesn't use all the runway length for all operations. You can still meet the length needs, but a concession has been made so that the takeoff distance available is different and the landing distance available is different. So go to the graphics that are on the bottom of that page. Option A is where we're using all available pavement that's put down on the ground. That means that for our takeoff distance available is the full 6,150 feet. The landing distance available is 6,150 feet. Now, if you look at option B is where we implemented declared distances. Declared distances give us the takeoff distance available or the TORA of all the new pavement. So the 895 feet plus the 5,000 plus feet that are already there. But the aircraft landing is truncated. So it allows an airport to maintain their landing threshold in relatively the same location. Aircraft comes in at roughly the same threshold location that they're coming in today. Of course, on the other side of the runway, runway 33, we're not changing anything. That remains the same. So just to give you another example of this, we did show you back in June simulations of what that might look like. So I'll just take this graphic now rather than showing you those simulations. If we put in the blue 895 feet at the approach end of runway 15. Now, a pilot taking off has 895 feet, additional feet for takeoff. When that pilot rotates, they're going to rotate a little bit closer than they were yesterday. So this blue line shows the runway extension. That aircraft coming over residential community is going to be a little bit higher. With the current runway end in the black, they're taking off at the existing threshold, they're rotating a little bit further down the runway, and they're climbing as they normally do today. With the runway extension, the use of declared distances gets the airport and our users what is needed, but it also takes into account what is needed because of the concerns that we've heard from our community. With that, I'm going to pause here. Ashley, do we have any comments on the runway extension, or does anybody have comments in their comment card? We will start noise after the runway discussion. Am I going to have to get my glasses? Can I give these to you and you can read through them? Are these all runway? Let me start with these.
What percentage of landings at the airport are private aircraft versus scheduled airlines? And then how many commercial airline passenger departures per year?
For the percentage of non-commercial aircraft, I don't know that off the top of my head, to be honest with you. I can provide that information on our website soon after this meeting. Our commercial activity is more seasonal. Obviously, Cape Air operates year-round, but JetBlue and American Airlines will be a May through September timeframe for those operations. And then year-round, we have a lot of private aircraft that do fly in and out of the airport. But in regards to the percentages, I don't know it off the top of my head, so I have to get back to you on that. I'm sorry, what was
How
this?
many commercial airline passenger departures per year? So you're asking how many commercial aircraft depart per year?
So
You want the number of passengers?
the number of passengers that are commercial. The last count that we looked at was, I want to say it was, this isn't a full year, it was just over 19,000 passengers, but that's not a full year, that's mid-year. So I'll have to get that number for you. It's in the tune of about 30 to 40,000 passengers. And that's just commercial. So the FAA, when they calculate the passenger activity, they're not taking into account the charter flights that operate at the airport or the flights that are operated by businesses that bring their employees back and forth to Nantucket and the Vineyard. Sure. Say that again? Is output. That's based on the economic output. I'm going back to that slide for you. That's the economic output, so that is people coming into the airport, people working at the airport, they're buying goods and services surrounding the airport. That is the economic output for this particular airport. The payroll, total payroll is of the 1,700 employees that are employed at the airport, only 25 work for the airport facility. employees of other businesses on the airport account for 1,724 jobs. Okay. Yes, 30,000 passengers right now. I don't know the answer to that. Sorry, sir.
The reason for my question is probably that whenever I go by the airport, it's always private jets. I don't have a lot of empathy for the private jets, the outgoers, the world, fly around on 10 passenger, 12 passenger jets.
And I can understand your thinking. However, as a public use airport, we are open for all operators. So if you were to also come at the airport at that same time, you would see MedFlight. You would see employees transitioning to and from work to the islands. You would see a mail plane that brings vital mail to and from the islands. You would see military aircraft operating at the airport. You would see students learning how to fly. You would see tour operators providing tours for people at the airport. There's a lot that happens at the airport besides just one entity. We have a very robust user group at the facility. We're extending it for all users, sir. Thank you. All users. All users. Do we have any other questions, Alyssa?
Yes, and I would point out that all of the operation and employment passenger data that you're asking about is broken down in Chapter 1 of the EA in very clearly identified tables, all of the data for the past 15 years. Okay, so this is a question, this is a bit of a technical question. What is the stopping distance of the type of JetBlue aircraft used here at the rotation point on runway at 6,500 feet?
Runway 33 when you extend it to 65.
I don't, technically, I do not know the answer to that, so we're going to...
That's a safety question, because I have very strong safety concerns that aircraft will not be able to stay on the runway if it keeps going in rotation. It's a short runway. With the tonnage of that aircraft and the speed that it's working up to, my safety concerns is that aircraft will not stay on the runway on rotation. If it has a bird strike, God forbid, or an engine failure, God forbid, you know, I know you might put an EMS system in, but the FAA should answer that. That is a safety question.
Well, the airline will come to the FAA and secure an operations specification where they look at the design of the aircraft, they look at what is at the airport, does it have the correct facilities to take care of it? So if somebody came in with 777s right now, they probably wouldn't get their operating certificate because there's just not enough room. So the FAA would not allow an unsafe airplane to come here.
Okay. We have some comments that I'm going to hold because they're not pertaining to the topics that we just covered, and we will be covering those comments, those topics. Let's see. This is another one for the FAA. Is the airport safe now? Ms. Service said that she looked at ways for the airport to run more safely.
Yes, the airport's safe now. Like I said, with the operations specifications for each of the aircraft, we're talking about extending a runway to make flights more optimal. Not that they're not safe now. What they will do is take a weight penalty, so they can't carry as many passengers, they can't carry as much fuel, they can't go the distances that they want to. But yes, the airport is operating safely.
There's a question of, do you have any concerns with obstacle clearance approaching runway 15 as related to the declared distance? Can you?
Sure. So when we looked at the runway extension and we looked at the approach surface for the runway, we took that into account. So when we looked at the various 29 alternatives, some of those alternatives were taken off of the table because they would not have the appropriate approach sequences that they needed and the protection of the airspace that they needed. We will be seeking for avigation easements that will allow us in the future, if we need to remove natural obstructions such as trees, we can do so. However, when we did look at these 29 various alternatives, we did take the approaches into account. The alternative that we're presenting here takes that into account and meets the requirements that would be required of us to meet from a design standard from the FAA.
Another question about, can you break down in detail all of the 1720 people who work at the airport? Please break out by who they work for and what their titles are. I think, Katie, you've alluded to this. They're not at the employees of the airport. They're employees of private businesses at the airport.
That's correct. So it's a mix of Cape Air employees, Griffin Avionics employees, employees that work for Atlantic Aviation. Mike Miller, sorry to put you on the spot here. Mike is from MassDOT Aeronautics. He's the Director of Planning. He just joined us, and they are in the process of redeveloping or updating the 2019 Economic Impact Report, which stated the 1,724 employees that are at the airport. Mike, I don't know if you can speak to that.
That is true. We will be updating that probably within the next 12 months, whatever, 3 to 5 years. So we're going on a street for our system plan and we're following on with economic impact. And it's not just the employees on the facility, it's the multiplier of what they provide to the community. So that's what probably justifies a lot of the numbers I'm hearing.
Can I ask a follow-up? On the employees that you're looking at on the airport property, it's kind of a general question, because the airport property extends out to Diana Road, where all this new shopping plaza, is that included in like the job total? All the way down in Route 28, which is actually around that area, is that included in your job total for the airport?
I was not here when the last study was conducted, but I don't think it went outside of the businesses that are actually aviation related on the airport.
We understand that the gas together.
I'm not aware of that.
That's airport property. When you say airport property, the airport owns that property, and that's where they're doing the new.
They own the plaza, but I would have to look at the 2019 study to see what it included. By the way, the 2019 study is available on MassDOT Aeronautics website.
Can I ask a follow-up displaced threshold question? That was my question.
Sure.
Service, you were very clear in saying that the pilots really wanted a long runway, but you had this balanced approach, and you were doing this major concession to the needs of the public, and you were giving up this piece of runway for the public. So you're saying there are no concerns for obstacles on the approach to runway 15 that would cause a displaced threshold. It was solely done to respond to the public's concerns about noise.
I would say that the vast majority of the information is so that we can come with a balanced approach. I am not an engineer. I did not design that alternative, but I can get back to you with information on that. The vast majority of that balanced approach was so that we can look at a way to balance what our needs were on the airport and what our needs were to respond to community concerns. Alyssa, do we have any other runway questions?
I think this is related to a runway question. What is a safe altitude flying over a dense residential area arriving at the airport? So the question is, what is the altitude, a safe altitude for planes on arrival, on approach?
Ultimately, aircrafts want to land, so their cruising altitude is different from their approach to the runway. So that aircraft in this question would be at different altitudes as they are coming down to ultimately 52 feet, which is where our airport is for our altitude. So the aircraft that's coming in for landing is going to be at different altitudes to eventually get to zero. Do we have any other runway questions before we move on to noise?
They take off, I believe here at Barnstable, aren't they supposed to maintain a
No, they can, on takeoff, they're going to be at different altitudes as they climb. So,
I understand that, what you're telling me is a change, because that has been an FAA policy to put it at a minimum of 1,000 feet. Because I have another one. Why is the FAA diverting aircraft from instrument into a visual flight path in stormy weather?
I don't have the answer to that, but if we could keep the questions relevant to the EA at hand, we can have a session afterwards to discuss outlying questions.
Answer if you could afterwards. You can email me, the airport has my email.
Sure.
Okay?
And these are all great questions that can be submitted through the airport's website, and comments will be through the airport's website, through the MIPA process, and responses will be in the final document.
okay, do we have any more runway questions? Because if not, we'd like to move on to noise. Okay. When they're landing, they will be coming in, which the ultimate goal is to land at the airport. So as they're flying on that approach to the airport, they are going to be in a constant descent to the airport property. So, it depends on the aircraft and how they're operating. If the aircraft is operating on what we call visual flight rules, that would be the pilot operating and arriving at the airport. Do you want, Colleen, do you want to? You have to just press the button.
I don't know that I can add much more. I'm Colleen Mayu. I'm the community planner for FAA New England region, so working with Massachusetts airports. So there is some controlled airspace, but ultimately flight procedures, which is a different line of business in the FAA, does design and determine what those approach procedures and what those protocols are. So I don't know that we can answer that question this evening, but there is another line of business, flight procedures, that would do this, and they are the ones who would be looking at controlled airspace and designing and determining what is the approach to that airport.
So they don't have a standard? Like, so is it smaller planes can go this high or this low, bigger ones can go, you don't know?
It all depends on, it's different and is designed based on the approach.
So to Colleen's point, our flight procedures for the department handles that. They do apply what's called applied obstacle clearance when they're designing the procedures, but we just can't answer that question right now as to what that is here. There is controlled airspace that the commanders are managing actively as the towers.
Well, we've just been asking the same question for, I don't know, I've been doing this for a year and a half or 2 years, in these room and other rooms, and we don't seem to be able to get an answer.
I just don't know what that number is right now.
And nobody seems to know, because nobody seems to answer it.
If you would like to submit that as a comment through the EA process, we can get an answer in the final document.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, we are going to go on to the noise portion of the presentation. Ryan, thank you for joining us. You might have to turn your microphone on.
Yes.
And Ryan, do you want the clicker so you can advance yourself through
Sure.
the slides?
Thank you. All right, good evening. Epsilon completed a noise study for the airport. The goals of the noise study were to evaluate the existing conditions at the airport and also the future build versus the future no build. We use a software program called the Aviation Environmental Design Tool, or AEDT. And we use that software to generate sound contour figures, and the goals of our study were to determine if the land uses around the airport would remain compatible in the existing conditions as compared to the future build versus no build. Our study was not a full Part 150 study. A complete Part 150 study would have other components to it, but the portions that we completed were consistent with the tools and metrics and evaluation criteria that the FAA prescribes. Switch this. Before I step into some specific results, we just have to touch on decibels. In acoustics, we use decibels to describe how loud something is. A decibel is a unit of measure that tells us the volume of a particular event or activity. So this is on the screen, we like to call it our noise thermometer that kind of gives some general guidance on common indoor and outdoor activities and what their corresponding levels would be. For example, if you're having a conversation with someone and you're standing 3 feet apart, normal speaking volume is in the range of 60 to 65 decibels. A car horn at 3 feet could be 100 decibels. The human ear is very sensitive, so we use the decibel scale, which is logarithmic, to describe things of various sound levels that span a very large range. So a Part 150 study requires the use of what's called the DNL sound level metric. That's the day-night average sound level to determine aviation noise exposure. So the DNL level is a 24-hour average sound level that includes penalties for activities that take place during nighttime hours. What that means is if you have activities that are taking place between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m., a 10 decibel penalty is added to all of those values before it goes into the equation to determine the final DNL value.
Did you say all this is, I didn't fully understand, all this is simulated or actually?
Simulated.
It's a software program. It's computer modeling that is software-based.
It's not take information, the data taken specifically from?
It is specific to the airport. It's the data from the airport's master plan. So every flight that took place over an entire year gets entered into the software program. So all of those takeoffs and departures, the specific aircraft type, which runway they're utilizing, all of that gets fed into the modeling software to determine the sound level.
Could I ask to clarify? I think what James' question is, though, was this actually tracked, or was this a manufacturer declaration of what the decibel was?
Well, the data from the airport was tracked and provided from the master plan, so that's
The data that's from the master plan came physically from the actual aircraft that departed and arrived at the airport.
And where was that reported? Where were the decibels?
so the software program, which is an FAA software, has the decibel levels of each of these corresponding aircraft built into the software itself.
So it's not something someone's actually physically experienced?
Well, each aircraft is essentially regulated by the FAA that has to meet a specific sound level to be certified as a specific type of aircraft. So that's where that measurement takes place. They do the measurements of the aircraft and plug that into the value.
I understand that as neighbors, but anecdotally, a 1998 Toyota is not going to have the same sound decibel readings in 2023 as it did in 1998. So what we're actually physically experiencing as residents might not be what is declared in those databases.
You actually measure the sound in your neighborhoods?
No, definitely not.
So one of the noise inputs is a very individualized noise profile for each of the aircraft that are flying. Then they have very individualized actual flight tracks of where planes are actually flying. They apply the noise profile from each of the aircraft into the model, and then it outputs the noise contours. When the noise profile was taken, they were taken at an airport, and they had 100 monitors on each side of the runway and beyond to help characterize that noise profile. No, sir.
So it was just an open space and the runway is what you're saying?
It would be an airport.
Yeah, so
And part of the AEDT model is, one of the inputs is, what is the topography of the area that you're looking at now? Are there tall buildings? Are there hills? Is there water that's going to reflect more noise? Things like that. It's very individualized to each airport when it gets run.
You had noise monitors here at the airport, are they still in operation?
We do not have any noise monitors in operation.
Here. I thought you would install some noise monitors.
No, we actually, sorry, I'm just
No,
gonna.
go ahead.
We actually looked into purchasing them,
Okay.
and when they looked into that, where they would place the noise monitors, the aircraft were so high up that they couldn't distinguish it between other noises in the community, so we were not able to get them.
A follow-up with the FAA. I've been doing this over 20 years. With this airport. Okay? I know I did very well with your predecessors with the noise, Part 150. You have to take an effect with the, you said any airport, but you haven't done it at this airport. You have to take in effect noise, the higher the airplane goes, the wider the nose cone.
Exactly. And that is modeled in the noise profile that is inserted into
And also
the model.
you have clouds. Cape Cod gets very cloudy. Clouds reflect noise back down.
And they calculate an average weather day. What is the average weather day? That gets taken into account for this as well.
You don't have the data here at Hyannis Airport. Actual data.
It wouldn't change the model. We could go out and put validating, actually, the FAA would not pay for validating noise monitors in the surrounding neighborhoods. All it would give you is a completely different metric from what is implied in the model.
Back in 99, 98, there was an actual Part 150 study done. And they had noise monitors placed in the neighborhoods. There was quite a debate in Hyannis Park.
What were the results of that? How did it compare to the results of the noise contours of the Part 150?
They were done with the Cessna 402s. They didn't include jets or turbine engines. And
So the noise monitors in the neighborhood, how did that inform you versus the noise contours that were output from the 150?
They did show higher.
It's a different metric. It is a different metric.
They did show higher. The only trouble is, they put the noise monitors in a way where the noise monitors had the aircraft coming, take off. As soon as it goes by it, there's a house, drops right down. It cuts it right off. It should have been, they had the opportunity to put it on a roof. So it would take the full noise ban all the way, but they didn't do it. And also, they had a company who supplied the aircraft was Cape Air. And they're the biggest noisemakers at the time at the airport.
So you're saying they didn't set up the noise monitors correctly, but it did line up with the 150?
That was definitely part of the problem. That's why I asked if they had the noise monitors at the airport, because they're wide open.
I think we need to move on.
So I'll just continue on this slide. I think we'll probably have more questions when I get through the presentation. Okay, so we use this software program to predict the future sound levels both with and without the runway extension. Again, it's using the DNL metric, which is a 24-hour sound level. The whole point of a metric of this length of time is to look at the cumulative noise exposure from an event. It is not designed to look at the momentary sound level as an aircraft is passing overhead. I recognize that when an aircraft flies overhead, it is going to be higher than the values that a DNL will show. So we did this modeling and compared the DNL levels to these specific criteria. A 65 decibel DNL, all land uses are considered to be compatible with that level. A 70 dBA, sorry, yeah, I'm kind of on this in-between slides here. A 70 dBA DNL is compatible with commercial land use. So this first slide here showing the results, what we're seeing here are the sound contours. This is showing the sound contours of the future conditions with the runway extended.
I'm getting somebody, Nate, to shut the lights off at the screen. Yes, just at the screens for me, thanks. She's coming in, Nate. She'll slap you if you touch yourself.
So the 65 DNL contour on this figure is shown in yellow. As you can see on the figure, it's largely contained within the airport property. The areas where the 65 contour extends beyond the property are on commercial lands.
And there are copies in the handout if you need them.
This next figure again shows DNL contours, but this time we're showing the build versus no build conditions. We're trying to show how sound levels would change as a result of the runway being extended. The contours are largely identical, as you'd expect, except for in the area where the runway is being extended. And that is circled there. And then our next slide zooms in on that area. So again, we see that the 65 contour is obviously growing with the runway there, but is mainly contained on the airport property. We did also go beyond just the DNL metric because we do recognize that looking at a DNL 20... Yep. So the yellow here is the 65. The red is 70. The yellow is 60. One more slide. Yep. This is the same figure, just zoomed out. Nope. So if I zoom in here, you'll see the shaded area. So the shaded area is the existing, and then the colored lines are the future. So we're overlaying both existing, we're overlaying the future build versus future no build. So we're trying to show what the impact of extending the runway would do. The green is 60 decibels as a DNL, a day-night sound level. The yellow is 65 dBA as a DNL. I know there's a lot of letters. I'm saying letters and numbers. And the blue is shown as well, which is the 55. Sure. Yes, that's 55. It's a, so, again, what these levels are is not a single aircraft flying overhead. It's not if you took a meter out and held it above your head as an aircraft is flying. I was getting to that in my presentation, so let me skip through and go there now. All right, so we recognize that the DNL metric does not correlate well to what you hear in real time as an aircraft is flying over your head. To step back, when we talked about decibels and the noise thermometer, human speech is 65. So if you're having a conversation with someone, an aircraft flies over, of course, you can't have that conversation at that moment because it's much louder than 65. So that is where this other sound level metric comes into play to give a little more perspective about what a single event might look like. This is the SEL level, the sound exposure level. So we use the same software program to develop sound exposure levels of a variety of aircraft. And what the sound exposure level does, it essentially takes the entire event of an aircraft approaching you, flying over your head, and then flying past you, of which that could last a good chunk of time, a minute or more. It compresses all of that down into a 1 second value as if it all took place in 1 second. So it integrates that into a 1 second value, which correlates a little better to what the specific sound levels you experience the moment an aircraft passes by.
So you take, when it's no noise at all, when it starts to make noise, till when it
That, yep, pretty much that is correct. So this graph here, you see the yellow portion, so that would kind of represent the moment you start to perceive an aircraft in the distance, and it's getting closer to you, and it's getting louder, and it's getting closer to you, and it's getting louder, and then it's directly overhead, and it's at its loudest, right in the middle, but then it continues on and gets further and further away. So that event could take a minute and a half, 40, depends on the, obviously, speed and altitude. The SEL metric takes that single event of one single aircraft and compresses it as if it all were to happen in a single second.
Okay, so, but, like, when it's directly overhead, that's the important thing to a person that's living there, all of it's important, but, like, it's not weighted like the most decibels we're gonna hear. You know, if you're doing it over, say, 3 minutes, you know, 3 minutes and all of a sudden it takes 2 seconds overhead, which is the loudest, it gets watered down over 3 minutes.
No, this one is actually the other way. So it's smushing it all. It's adding up all of that sound that's happening even as you're just starting to hear it.
Right.
Let me just get to the levels, and maybe they'll correspond better to what you're experiencing. So the results of the SEL sound level modeling, we looked at areas in Hyannis Park, we looked at areas in Barnstable Village, and we looked at 4 different types of aircraft. So, for instance, a Challenger 600 using runway 15 in Hyannis Park would be 83 decibels. So that's obviously much higher than the DNL values that we were showing. So the purpose of this is to show that the modeling software is correct and doing a good job at predicting the sound levels there, but the metric that we're using is the DNL with respect to land compatibility.
Okay, so I'm obviously missing this. So if it's overhead, like it has been at my house, at, 185, right? I mean, that's not the 80, whatever. So, we're worried about the maximum noise versus the average.
We're not measuring anything. We're just
So the FAA metrics, we had the Federal Interagency Conference on Noise, and so this was the FAA, this was military with jets, this was the Park Service with their jets. They came up with a way to consistently measure sound and exposure and compatible land use, and it was the DNL metric. So we could do LMAX graphs for you, we could do SEL graphs for you, we can do DNL graphs for you, and they would all look the same. What the FICAN group decided was that they were going to pick DNL because it gave a broad range of cumulative effects. So if you had, one jet flying over, zoom, you don't get a lot of credit for that. If you've got planes humming every, 30 minutes over your head and you've got more cumulative energy, and then they start coming at night, now they've got a penalty. This is more accurate and gives more of I know it doesn't feel representative, but it does represent, it is representative of all the noise under all those noise contours that you're seeing on the last slide. It does take all of that into account and put it into a picture that we can use. And the FAA has decided that DNL is the way that we're going to do this consistently across the country, and that's how we've set our thresholds. So you can ask for what is the LMAX, but it's just going to give you a number. When it comes to the FAA and our thresholds and whether we get into residential sound insulation, new windows, new doors, ventilation packages, we have to stop at the 65 threshold. This is what has been relegated to us to use.
Well, in the summer, we want to be outside, not inside. So
That when
we have to do that.
Was it an possibility to
DNL, day-night average. So it's not just I heard something real quick that was 65 decibels. It is that accumulation of all that noise throughout a day.
But I'm asking wasn't it possible to take a measurement and bring it in here and let us hear what the noise sounds like?
Well, I think you can go to the airport and have that sound. I mean, having us bring in a sound that is 65 dB cumulatively over a day, that would be a little hard. We could show you a 65 max.
Something with whatever measurement instrument that in Hyannis Park, let's say somewhere, and it's sort of just do, maybe a couple of flights arriving in the park and what have you, so that you can get some idea of what the noise sounds like, instead of just talking with these decibel numbers on the slides. Is that a possibility? I mean, obviously, we just do it. Modeling,
So we're doing what's required by the regulations. So we're trying to go through a regulatory process and follow the guidance that we're mandated to follow. We understand that that not necessarily may always result in a real-world number that everyone can understand, but what we're doing is we're following what FAA has determined for airports to do as part of their NEPA documentation process.
So I think there's a problem when you engage with computer modeling.
I think Ryan brought up the common sound levels to get to one of your questions in regards to what those sound levels are for common outdoor and indoor noises. And when we look at, 80, I'll just pick 80 right now, and I'm having a hard time seeing that. But that's a noisy urban environment. Or if you go up to 90, indoors, it's a food blender from 3 feet away. So these are the common noises that we're hearing in a decibel level, decibel level for those common indoor and outdoor noises that we hear. The same would be true for an aircraft in that 1 second or one period of time, with the peak being the level of that particular aircraft. So to ask about, what does it sound like if it's 70 or 80, that's what we're showing you here. Those are common outdoor and indoor noise levels for various activities.
Still doesn't make, for me, it doesn't do the trick. I would like to hear what it sounds like.
Maybe I have one slide left, so we'll just get to the end of the noise piece here. Just going back to the SEL metric, in addition to predicting the specific values of specific aircraft, we also generated a sound contour figure of a Cessna 402 using runway 15. So in this figure, the red is 95 decibels, the yellow is 90 decibels, and the green is 85 decibels. So this contour more closely correlates to what you would experience of that single aircraft in that one moment of time as it is flying overhead. Okay.
Thank you. Alyssa, do we have any comment cards that were related to noise before we move on?
Yes. So this is very specific to documentation provided in the EA, but also addresses what Ryan just talked about. Appendix H excludes aircraft larger than an E190. Are they replacing JetBlue? Is AA replacing JetBlue as their service seasonal? Okay, that's not so specific. So I think that the Appendix H, we selected the 4 noisiest aircraft that are most frequently operated at the airport, so that they had the highest number of operations and are the noisiest of the fleet of aircraft to model. So that was the reasoning behind selecting those 4 aircraft. The E-190, the Embraer 190, I don't know if there's anything bigger that operates at the airport.
There are a number of, the Embraer 190, 100 passenger, from a commercial standpoint, that is the largest aircraft that operates at the airport.
I think we addressed this. I think it's more of a statement. The FAA computer model does not show the real effects of noise. The day-night average shouldn't be removed. Single event noise study should be done. It would show the real noise that affects people. So I think we just went through what FAA requires us to do and why we're using the modeling with the DNL results. Is there any follow-up questions to that? Okay. Bring it up. Nate will get it. This is a little bit. What decibel level at repeated exposure poses a negative effect on human health? So that's like sounds like a thesis study.
I have those numbers. My daughter, I said this, I'm a daughter-in-law, is an audiologist, so this is according to the CDC. So, at 82 decibels, you get permanent damage, hearing damage if it's 16 hours. But if it's at, what you said it was, so it's been over 100, all of us that have tested that, over 100. It can be no more than 15 minutes over a course of 24 hours before you get permanent damage, hearing damage. So we're getting more than that amount of time in the summer, and it's higher than 100 decibels. So the CDC saying we're all being exposed to noises that are damaging our hearing.
So if you look at this single event right here, the center, the orange is 95 decibels. And what was the time frame what was your daughter?
So 95 decibels, if you've been exposed to it for 30 minutes, you have permanent hearing damage.
So you would have to hear it for 30 minutes straight.
No, 30 minutes total in a 24-hour period.
Do you have, how many flights do you hear a day?
Yeah, at least 20, 30.
But you're also not under the 95. That would be like standing on the airfield.
Oh, no, I stood there with my phone and get the decibels. We're all getting decibel readings. We're all getting decibel readings.
But the 95 for the single event is, the 95 is a single event for, on the airfield is where the 95 decibel contour is.
Well, I can tell you that my daughter-in-law was at our house and saying, we all have to go inside and tell your neighbors to go inside because we're getting, damaging our hearing by staying out here.
So where is your home under this contour?
It's,
Are you-
near Lewis Bay.
I don't. So you're in the green, and that's the 85. So what is 85?
But we're not in 85. That's the point, is that we're average of 85. We're not worried about the average. We're worried about.
No, this is a single event right here. This is not the DNL that we were talking about.
Well, this is assessment too. We're looking at Embraer, they're much higher.
The single event, is that computer generated or actual tape?
That would be a computer generation from,
Cape Air, they take off, a lot of their pilots, because that's where the noise complaint, they use full throttle. And that full throttle is gone. I live in West Yarmouth by the Bayberry Golf Course. And they're coming at me at full throttle, and that's a good distance away from the airport. All right, and that's where I usually come in with the noise. I haven't had a chance to get my noise meter on my phone out there yet, but I'll tell you right now, it's above it.
well, we can't, the FAA won't accept data from Apple iPhones, Apple Watches, third-party vendors, because we can't verify that.
I know it's not professional like the meters you got. We've asked, I think the airport has asked, for them when they cannot take off, they start turning to level up, to throttle back. For a while, some of the pilots would do it, but it hasn't. I just talked to the assistant manager now. There's a hot dog taking off at 6:15 in the morning, full throttle. And when I checked my app here to play it back, on the airport tracking, he's not showing. He shuts his transponder off. And that's what they're doing. They shut their transponders off. Maybe you guys can pick them up or not. But I could tell, if I could pick up military planes with their transponders on, I know what a transponder is. I spent 30 years in the Air Force.
Well, the transponders are a little outside the scope of the environmental assessment at this point.
They're fine. That's why, in my question, you don't need day-night. See, personally, it's a wash. This whole thing is a washout.
Well, what we have is FAA guidance.
What you need to do is a single event study.
But if we did a single event study, it would give results that the FAA cannot work with.
You work.
If we need to know what threshold is going to be significant, and we have set up our program to use DNL, and you do single event, how do I cross that and say, these people need home insulation?
So could you do it over the 5-month period where we have most of the noise as opposed to,
It's a different metric.
well, we have 7
And
months
that's getting cumulative as well.
I'm sorry, we can only operate and talk about what the Part 150 regulation says. That's what we're beholden to as public
Is
service.
this gonna end
But
up
as
going to
public
court?
servants, you should be holding to us also.
This is the regulation in the United States. For federal employees, we're only dealing with what the federal regulation says because that is what our mission is. We understand what you're saying, we hear your frustration, but please understand that we have a federal regulation as a regulatory agency that we have to comply with. That's all this plan is talking about, is we're talking about the federal regulation, and we need to use DNA. I mean, we're kind of talking in circles here.
Well,
But it's the
I
same
mean,
event.
We understand.
But the CDC says, cdc.gov, so I mean,
That's a disconnect between two federal agencies.
Yeah.
We're not legislators. So, I mean, we're an executive branch, and right now, we're complying with the regulation.
Are you state employee?
I am not a state employee. I am a federal employee.
You work for the people. You work for the taxpayers. You should just start paying attention to the taxpayers
I do.
instead of big lobbyists like the airline industry. And that's what's controlling this. It's the airline, you sure you can't tell me.
I think we need to move on. I think we need to move on. Thank you.
you're moving on because you don't like what we're saying. Our frustration is so high. I tell you, if my daughter-in-law is saying, get inside, she's a researcher at Duke University. She works for the VA. I mean, these noises are appalling. We're getting the same noise levels as, she would get machine gunned sometimes.
Okay. I think we are going to move on in the time that we have left. I understand there's a disagreement between how we regulatory have to report on noise versus the community, but we do need to move on. Thank you. Joint Base Cape Cod as an alternative was brought forward by the community asking questions about that possibility. Joint Base Cod, formerly known as Otis, was not included in the current master plan study, but was previously included in past environmental reviews that were conducted when the airport's terminal and tower were redeveloped and moved. The idea was ultimately dismissed in 2000 as being infeasible due to many regulatory, logistical, and financial constraints of such an undertaking. What I have there on the screen was the document that was provided by the statement of the Executive Office of Environmental Affairs. It was the certificate that was received as part of the project for the airport terminal and tower from the Secretary of Environmental Affairs on August 23rd, 2000. I'm just going to read it here for you. Several comment letters suggest that some airport operations could be moved to Otis Airfield. While this alternative would have the benefit of reducing impacts in the immediate vicinity of Barnstable Airport, In fact, it merely shifts the impacts elsewhere. In addition, the Environmental Notification Form, ENF is what it stands for, presents sufficient and compelling reasons, including ownership and jurisdiction, why the Otis alternative would not be feasible. Therefore, I am not requiring that this alternative be analyzed further in the DEIR, the Draft Environmental Impact Report. That was the 2000 report associated with the with the terminal and the tower. Moving forward to this development for this draft EIR and EA, we looked at relocation of Cape Cod Gateway Airport to Joint Base Cape Cod. It was further analyzed in this draft environmental impact report and may be deemed neither realistic nor economically feasible for the following reasons. The Airport Commission is an agency of the town of Barnstable entrusted with the management of the airport. It is a public facility with an enterprise fund from the town of Barnstable. For the commission to address an alternative that is outside its municipal borders is inconsistent with both its powers and its obligations. The commission has no right or the ability to operate outside of Barnstable limits. The alternatives under consideration are limited to airport property. The Joint Base Cape Cod is the property of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and it is leased by the federal government under the Department of the Air Force. As I just recently stated in the first bullet, the Commission has no authority to plan for future use of that property. Lastly, Joint Base Cape Cod lacks the necessary terminal facilities to provide passenger boarding and deboarding, including redevelopment of other existing facilities such as hangars, the 65 businesses that are on airport, staff offices, and other facilities that are currently at Cape Cod Gateway Airport. Those would need to be reconstructed in Joint Base Cape Cod. It would be redundant facilities with Cape Cod Gateway Airport. Continuing on and looking at the Joint Base Cape Cod as an alternative, the consequences of relocating Cape Cod Gateway Airport would result in a significant loss of tax revenue to the town of Barnstable. Right now, 2023 numbers at the time when we looked at these were $705,000 in property taxes that our current tenants pay to the town of Barnstable. That could be more by the end of the year. It would require the town of Barnstable to reimburse the United States and the Commonwealth for past expenditures of airport grants and funding that they have received. To date, this totals over $87 million. This is beyond what the airport could fund under its enterprise fund. Currently, we have registered $13 million in our reserves. Obviously, $13 million is not going to pay back $87 million. It would require someone to pay to relocate the existing businesses and leases or buy them out. It would result in a commercial service airport in a less central location on Cape Cod for its users. The map that's located on that graphic in the far lower right identifies resident use of commercial air by town, with the larger circles indicating areas of higher percentage of use. So that graphic is showing that the most centrally is the area of Barnstable that people use air transportation. This data was from the 2018 passenger study that was done. In conclusion, we understand the community's interest in looking at this as an alternative and exploring this as an alternative. We explored it further beyond the 2000 alternative that was studied. As I just mentioned in the previous slides, the result of the earlier study plus preliminary investigations as part of this draft environmental impact report indicates that the idea may be deemed infeasible due to previous lack of justification, issues with governance, shifting the airport concerns elsewhere to other towns, ownership issues, lack of commercial facilities and passenger terminals, as well as costs. The town of Barnstable would have to repay at least $87 million to the state and the feds for the funds that were already issued to us for various grants. Relocate and rebuild infrastructure at Joint Base Cape Cod would be significant. Refunding existing airport tenants and leaseholders would be a requirement. We would have a loss of permanent businesses and disruption of permanent businesses that have made this airport their home. And we would lose investments made to the existing improvements that have already been made at Cape Cod Gateway Airport. I can stop here before we get on to water quality and PFAS. These are our last few slides. Were there any comments in regards to Joint Base Cape Cod?
We had some questions on
Sure, we can go back to that. Turn your, sorry.
So there's a question about the standard instrument departure procedure, that that the town of Yarmouth was told it would be evaluated as a mitigation measure. That has not been done. Why? Why has that been restricted to FAA interaction and commuter air taxi operators such as Cape Air? Why aren't larger and noisier aircraft included? So I think this is the same as what we had this afternoon.
Very quickly, I want to say this, it's a little awkward sometimes to hear from members of the public. I understand that I do this for a living as well. Robert Rittenau, I'm an administrator of the town of Yarmouth. But, the issue, and we respect and we completely understand the FAA's guidelines on having that average noise and having that be, the determining factor for the safety of the airport. And obviously, all of the local residents are genuinely concerned about the decibel levels on the single events. And you did study that, and we think it's great. And we've had these discussions over and over and over again. And I think that the feeling is we've approached this not saying that, that the airport is unsafe because of the single event noise, but obviously it's tremendous agony for the residents that live in the area. And I just want to say that we've worked very hard to try to be collaborative and to suggest mitigation measures, right, that are designed to limit the impact of these single event noises, which, we know can get over 90 decibels. And that's kind of high. And our key point is that we feel that it could be addressed in a way that is not detrimental to the operations of the airport, but meets the community needs in, I think, a little better way. And I would say also that we talk a lot about the FAA standards to receive that certification. And again, with respect to those standards, the process that we're trying to go through here is an environmental impact report, that with the EIR for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and the federal one. I honestly think that some of these standards, it's not just an exercise to determine whether you meet the minimum standards of the FAA. We already understand that there's a provisional certification, and we respect that. But through this process, we have identified some mitigation measures that are easily adapted that would address the key concerns of the people that live here. And we're very disappointed that we had several meetings that it seemed that we had made some headway on adopting those as a way to assist the local residents. But now we're at the stage that we have the draft report, and it's not in there. And then we just got to see it for the first time Friday, and it's going to be sent in this Friday. So now we have to go and make comments that are going to be, perceived as negative towards the airport to the state officials, which we had hoped that what we could do is enter into a collaborative process where we jointly develop these mitigation measures that could help the process. And it's, for us in the community, it's not enough to just hide behind the FAA regulations and say, well, we met those minimum regulations, so that's all we need to do. That's not a true statement. You may be able to receive the certification, right, on the master plan, meeting just those FAA standards. But I would submit to you that our community standards are a little higher, and we sincerely hope that we can continue to work together to address those standards that involve more than just the average noise profile. And if there are ways that it can be done without cost, even, just ways that are very practical, the idea that you can dismiss those because the FAA doesn't require them, that's not an regulations, their expertise, but we have, I think, another step that we need to take. And thank you for letting me speak. It was very frustrating, and I know, I apologize for everyone here that's upset, but the whole moderated debate is not the type of a public meeting that we're accustomed to, so it's very difficult to just make ourselves work within that.
So to get back to the issue of, I think you were talking about adding flight procedures as a mitigation. I believe that's what was in the comment. That is, it is a process that the airport can initiate through the FAA, and they take a look at it, try and make sure that it is a safe operation. It is not conflicting with other flight paths in the area, and it is a process that can be initiated. That's a great comment to make during the EA process.
There's a question, why can't there be mandatory noise abatement measures?
Again, this goes back to the regulations that the FAA has to stay within. It is a public airport. It needs to be open at all times. It can't discriminate against other aircraft, any type of aircraft. It can't single out any type of aircraft and tell them they cannot fly or how they can fly. It is up to the operator to make sure that they are flying safely.
This.
What you're saying is they can fly anytime?
The airport needs to be available and open 24 hours a day. If the airport has voluntary quiet hours, night hours, that is not anything that the FAA could enforce.
And not anything at the airport, like
It would have to be voluntary. They cannot tell anybody they cannot fly. The airport has to be open at all times, and they would have to get their tenants and the users to agree to not fly at night. That's a business decision within the airlines.
Sorry, Charlton Wayne has a mandatory. This is, all pilots have to not go full throttle or they're fined. Why can't we do something like that?
So there is a process that you can go through. It's called Part 161, and you can apply to have noise measures, quiet hours, things like that. However, you have had to have had those in a town regulation, city regulation, something like that, prior to ANCA coming in 1980-something. 1990. And then for it to be, then you would present that noise quiet mitigation to the FAA. They would go through and see if it is something that they can enforce. I know that Hanscom has that. There's one in Fort Lauderdale. But the number of Part 161 applications that actually get approved is Naples. Thank you.
So pilots are allowed to go full throttle over us.
It's not very neighborly, but we cannot tell them how and when to fly. Those are business decisions made by the airline.
But I can't fly a drone in the airway, right?
No.
So how can cities that with noise ordinances around leaf blowers, invest in lawn blowers, can't implement as a city, anything around noise coming from an airport?
Correct. Yeah. It is a federal regulation that all airports, all public airports need to be open and able to fly unless they've gone through a Part 161 application.
Another airport had certain arrangements where you couldn't fly in London. It used to be, you couldn't fly in London between 6, midnight and 6. Now
I don't know. That would not be enforceable. That would be Logan's policy that they are asking voluntarily the airport users to fly under.
There was a second question of, will the airport incorporate graphics in the text of the voluntary noise abatement program as a mitigation measure?
So we do have graphics on our website. Bob, after we spoke to you, those were posted within a month after your comment. So we do have those on our website already, on the noise website. All right, I think we need to move on to water quality and PFAS.
Thank you. So just a quick breakdown of what the airport currently operates and how the proposed projects will comply for water quality regulatory requirements as well as PFAS. So the airport maintains the following measures for water quality improvements at the airport. So there's a stormwater pollution prevention plan, annual cleaning and monitoring of stormwater management structures, and these are reported on an annual basis to Mass DEP under the multi-sector general permit. Yes, sir.
Yes, sorry about that.
It's been a very long day.
Sorry about that.
Who did you speak with at JBCC in the course of your study?
We did not engage conversations with JBBC. We just looked at what capabilities the airport had and what particulars would be surrounded by the airport moving to Joint Base Cape Cod, which are all the elements that I made reference to in my slideshow.
Yes, and again, looking at it from a MEPA and NEPA perspective, you are shifting the environmental burden into a different community, and in this case, in 3 different communities. So you would have to do, that's outside the scope of this documentation.
But isn't it built away from communities, unlike Hyannis Airport, Gateway Airport? I mean, was it built specifically that way so the military could test and?
There are portions of that base that, yes, that are away from the community, but as you pointed out, we would have to look at all of the impacts related to any shift in use.
But you haven't spoken to anyone over there.
We have not engaged conversations with Joint Base Cape Cod. We looked at this analysis as what it would do for the airport existing here. The airport commission only has control of the airport, the 639 acres that exist here in Hyannis and in Barnstable. So no, we did not speak to Joint Base Cape Cod. We identified the obstacles that would be associated with moving this airport to Joint Base Cape Cod and what that consists of.
But if you spoke to them, maybe those obstacles wouldn't be there.
No, the obstacles, can I have the clicker, please? Sorry. The obstacles would still be there. So we would still have to contend with all of these issues. The Airport Commission is an agency of the town of Barnstable. They do not have the right to say what's going to happen in another entity, Joint Base Cape Cod. It is property of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and it's leased to the federal government. It would be a legislative change that would have to occur for this to happen. Joint Base Cape Cod lacks all the necessary terminal facilities and passenger facilities. It lacks hangars that would be used by our existing tenants. All of those structures that we have here today that have been paid for and created at this airport, most of those structures would have to be redeveloped at Joint Base Cape Cod. When we look at relocating Joint Base Cape Cod, there would also be impacts to the town of Barnstable. There would be a significant tax implication, $705,000 from property taxes in 2023. $87 million of grant funds that we have accepted would have to be paid back by the town of Barnstable, by you people in this room that live in the town of Barnstable, that are part of the general fund would have to pay back this $87 million.
Why would we have to pay it back? I don't understand that.
So when, one of the things I said in the beginning was FAA's role is approval of the airport layout plan and the funding program that we're in. When an airport takes a grant from us, they sign on to a series of grant assurances. We will make sure that the airport is open. We're going to spend this money wisely. We're going to spend it the way we spend it, or we're going to spend it the way we said we were going to spend it. And we will give the structure, whatever they're buying, a runway, a hangar, a terminal, its useful life. If they terminate before the end of its useful life, they need to return the money.
So I don't, okay, and I get that, but I don't understand why the town of Barnstable has to do that when the airport is taking money. We didn't get any benefits from that.
The airport is a town department, although we run ourselves with an enterprise fund, so we generate our fees to be able to pay for our operating budgets. We are still a town department. The town is a backstop. The town signs those grant assurances along with us. So it would be on the town that would have to pay back the government. Obviously, we would use the funds that we have available in our reserves, but then the town would be on the hook for the rest of it. They sign those grant assurances too.
I spoke to the FAA myself, to a grant writer, and when I told her what you said, you know, in '87, she said that's partially true. They prorate things 20 or 30 years. So I said, if it's possible, if it takes 10 years to merge these airports, would we owe you anything? Well, she wasn't sure how much to actually pay. And I asked her, a scenario, if they merged, has it ever been a precedent set with the FAA forgot to give grant money? And she said, Dr. Lynn, is it absolutely true? They will forget grant money if it's for the overall benefit of aviation.
So I believe that I spoke with you. That second part that you said, I did not state that there's forgiveness of the grant obligation, so that would be incorrect. I'm not aware of any instance where the FAA has forgiven the federal investment or the debt owed on the federal investment. But you are correct that, and as Cheryl stated, there is a useful life that is dictated by the type of improvement. And so, for example, for a building like the control tower, there's a 40-year useful life on the building. So whatever the investment is on that building, we expect to see a 40-year useful life. If there is an instance where there may be a need to change this facility or modify a facility, there have been instances where there is a proration on that repayment. But typically, this is something that when we're looking at that lifespan, we're expecting that federal investment that we put into the airport, if it's 40 years for a building, typically about 20 years for pavement projects, we expect to see that investment lived out to its full useful life, or then there may be an opportunity for some proration, but there would need to be a repayment of any of that federal investment. It's protecting your tax dollars to make sure that the money that's invested is being fully utilized.
In 10 years, what do you estimate that the ballpark figure? What the town actually, what's the ballpark in 10 years?
Yeah, I couldn't begin to give you that calculation, unfortunately. I really can't calculate that.
You agree with me, it's not 87 million, that's misinformation?
I can't. I don't know what the number is, and I would not want to speculate on what the proration might be.
So the 87 million is based on the grants that we have received over the past several years, within at least the past 20 years. So that's a calculation of all of the projects that the airport has done at the airport where we received grant funding.
Turned off. Can you explain the process for a community to enter into FAA's military airport program?
I'm not exactly sure how that's germane for the EA, but it is a process where an application is. Is this still on? All right. I'm not exactly sure how that's germane to the EA here, but in terms of the military airport program, that is a program where former military installations that have been bracked and turned over to municipal agencies are funded in order to upgrade them to the FAA standards. There's a big difference between military standards and the civilian FAA standards. So some of that program offers some relief for those communities that have taken these BRAC facilities and to bring them up into commercial level standards. In terms of Cape Cod Gateway,
they're not eligible for the MAP program, so I'm not entirely sure that's germane to this discussion. And Cape Cod, Joint Base Cape Cod was not BRAC'd. It's still the ownership, under the ownership of the federal government. So,
Can I just add that the Joint Base already has a 1,000-foot runway, what we are seeking.
sure.
It's already there.
And that's owned by the federal government, sir,
Okay.
not owned by a municipality.
No, but if they were looking for someone to merge with, would you think we'd be under the obligation to go up there and speak with them?
I can't speculate to that, sir. That's the Department of Defense's asset.
No, I mean us. Wouldn't you say that if there was an opportunity to save the government money? Because our national debt is already skyrocketed. So if we save the 25 million and invest it instead of there.
Again, I can't speak to the decisions of another entity. So, thank you.
Thank you, Luke. I think with the time that we have left, I think we need to go over just the water quality. I think what we should do here is take these comments back. There are some IOUs in the questions that were asked tonight where I could not respond because I didn't know the answer, that we need to get back to the group here. That can be in the form of frequently asked questions through all of the comments that we received, plus the comments that will be received through the federal and the state process will go directly to the MEPR office. So if you could wrap up with water quality.
We also had some slides on air quality,
Yep.
and there were some comments. Okay. I'll make this short and sweet. So any impervious surface that are proposed to be added to the airport will fully comply with the Massachusetts stormwater standards, as well as any requirements for Cape Cod Commission, which protects the sole source aquifer. The wetland impacts related to the proposed projects are very limited to one taxiway relocation associated with taxiway D and impacts to Upper Gate Pond. So we've addressed these water quality concerns and impacts in great detail in the EA/EIR with proposed mitigation measures. And we've also discussed the way we've avoided and minimized these impacts. We'll have no new untreated stormwater discharges, and any infrastructure that is not currently up to standards will be brought up to standards as part of this project. The airport continues to hold meetings on PFAS. As Katie noted, there's a second public information plan meeting on PFAS of this year on December 18th. So that's the second meeting being held since August. This slide just details the location of the relocation of taxiway Delta as it relates to Upper Gate Pond. And what's hard to detail from this slide is the elevation difference between the elevation of the airfield and the elevation of the pond. There's quite a steep drop down to the pond. So, so we're engineering that slope, but in order to construct a taxiway that is fully compliant with FAA and the full separation requirements, so there are some moderate impacts to Upper Gate Pond that will be looked at carefully and done in full compliance through all local, state, and federal permitting requirements. As part of the EA/EIR, we also looked at air quality in reference to federal regulatory requirements, the federal standards. So these air quality impacts are regulated under NEPA and the Clean Air Act, as we addressed in the document. And these laws identify what the acronym as known as, or stated as NAAQS, NAAQS, the National Ambient Air Quality Standards. It also identifies attainment areas, state implementation plans, and how all projects must comply with the NAAQS. So we've addressed compliance with these air quality standards. The project is fully compliant as proposed. We've also done additional greenhouse gas analysis. This looks at emissions across the projects as related to both construction and operation. And that was done in compliance with MEPA. There's also been a recent EPA finding regarding lead emissions from piston engine aircraft. So this requires FAA to regulate lead emissions from piston aircraft, but there are no regulations or rules to implement at this time. So FAA is initiating rulemaking for these new regulations. But we did take a look at measured lead concentrations in Massachusetts and compared to both what the standards are and what the current levels are. And our findings were that the operations at the airport will not increase lead emissions in the region. Next slide. So this is just, this slide is showing some of the other air quality parameters that the NACs examine. And they look at it, so you have particulate matter, ozone, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, et cetera, looking at them as like in different averaging times and looking at what the background concentrations are versus what the national quality or the NACs require them to be. And so all of these parameters that have these regulatory requirements, there'll be no significant change in air operations, there'll be no changes that would result in increased air pollution concentrations. So we looked at background air concentrations, so we looked at actual levels versus what the national standards are. So, so the current levels are well below those national standards. And we'll also, as part of the project, any temporary impacts related to construction, we also will be implementing best management practices to ensure that emissions remain well below those requirements.
Thank you. I think you had a couple of questions on air quality. Also, the airport is looking at installing its first electric aviation charging station for smaller aircraft fleets at the airport. We also were the only airport in the nation to win a grant through the state, thank you, through MassDOT as well. We're partnering with MassDOT to look at the implementation of a smart grid microgrid here at the airport so that we can install, in addition to our 20-acre array that we already have at the airport for solar array, as well as the number of solar arrays that are on rooftops in our buildings. We're also looking at the implementation of more solar and the collection of that solar and the energy that's provided into a microgrid, smart grid position, so that during peak hours, when we do have electric aviation that's operating at the airport, they have a way for rapid recharge at the facility at the airport. And again, we're the only airport in the nation that won that grant.
There's a question, is there a way to measure air pollution from a plane engine? So as part of this evaluation, no, we did not measure specific, make additional measurements. We used existing air monitoring stations to evaluate against the national standards.
And I can add to that, the AEDT model we use for noise also takes into consideration the emission profile of each of the planes, and you can calculate similar numbers to this graph up here, and you can probably see that in the EA. It'll show you what the emissions are for construction and for future operations of the airport.
This is probably more of a statement than a question, just that the simulation showing the aircraft taking off does not show exhaust or noise. No, it did not. It was just a visual simulation.
Any other questions regarding air quality, water quality? Okay. Yes.
I'm very concerned, I didn't mean to put in a common question, but on several occasions, I spend a lot of time outside walking, doing things outside, and on several occasions, not just once or twice, I've had planes go over me, and the fuel emissions are so strong that it burns my eyes, burns my throat. Is there, what can you do to keep these planes from
So I understand what you're saying, that jet oil or jet fuel does not smell great. So the modeling that we did and the calculations that are done in the EA about air emissions are set against these, the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, which are set by the EPA. There are two sets. There are primary and there are secondary thresholds. The primary is supposed to be protective of human health and taking into consideration elderly and children. And then the secondary standards are for wildlife, infrastructure, things like that. So when we look at the emissions that are calculated and output from AEDT, it is taking a comparison against what the EPA says is protective of health. And I believe we're de minimis on all of the issues. I don't know what they would be releasing other than just general. Planes wouldn't be dropping anything over.
I get stuff on my sunglasses all the time, and I know so, I don't know what it is, but it's just like. I just don't know if there's any way you can regulate that.
Well, the FAA is in the process of looking for cleaner fuels and as we move into the future, plane design is getting more efficient. Trying to move into sustainable aviation fuel, which uses, less avgas than is currently out there. And as far as like where we've been before with planes and old stages of aircraft, 60 years ago, 40 years ago, all of those older planes have rotated out of use. And now we're into these newer, cleaner burning engines. And so as we move through time, air quality should improve.
Ma'am, I think you'll agree, though, that the greenhouse emissions from airplanes are the worst form of any transportation. Is that correct?
Yeah, and if you look in the EA, there are greenhouse gas emissions calculations in there.
Okay, I think we're about to wrap up here. At the table where we have the sign-in sheet, we have the projects that are proposed within the EA. We did larger copies for you. That was one of the comments that we received back in June. I wanted to give the FAA an opportunity to talk a little bit about substantive comments and how to comment on this draft EIR before we go to final. Please note that I was asked by a resident to move the comment period into February, and we have done that. This should be posted on MIPA's website on December 22nd, and the closing date for comments will be February 9th.
So under CEQ regulations, we come out to the public to be very clear in what the projects are and our analysis of impacts. And you get a chance to look at the analysis and the inputs into the environmental assessment and make your comments. CEQ only asks us to reply to substantive comments. So anecdotal comments, comments that you don't like something, comments that are outside of the scope of this EA. I don't know. You don't like the fire trucks there. I don't know. Something like that is outside of the scope of what is being addressed in this EA would not be considered substantive. So we welcome your comments. We hope to make this a better document based on your input and your experiences. But the comments need to be thoughtful and helpful to the analysis. Yeah, I think that's it.
Okay. Thank you. So just next steps, the draft EA/EIR that we've been talking about this evening, it was made available pre-advance on our website on Saturday. We had some glitches on our website on Friday night, which is why it showed up on Saturday. It's there in advance of the MIPA document, which is the same document, but we've provided it to our community prior to when it will be available, which will be submitted on the 15th, but available for public consumption on the 22nd. So we're ahead of the game. We provided it on the 9th of December. When that is available in the environmental monitor, then the clock starts for comment period, and that will last through February 9th. On February 16th, we anticipate a draft EIR MIPA decision, and then we will start working on the final draft, or excuse me, the final EA/EIR based on the comments that we received. Just like when we completed the environmental notification form back in January of this year and received a secretary's certificate for that form, that secretary's certificate identified what the scope of work and elements that would be incorporated into this draft that was on our website on Saturday. So the scope of work that was developed through the ENF identified how we were going to move forward with documentation and comments and responses to comments based on what was received from the ENF. The same would be true here. Comments would be received in writing for the draft EIR. We would review those comments and respond to those comments. They would develop a scope of work of how we are supposed to respond, what elements we are to include in the final EIR. And then the FAA will make a determination sometime after that final EIR is completed, EA and EIR. They will make a determination, MIPA for the state side will have a certificate for the final EIR, and then we'll step into the permitting process and review by the Cape Cod Commission. Did I leave anything out, Alyssa?
You covered it. MIPA may or may not require a public meeting as part of their review. Typically, they do not.
Okay, that concludes tonight's meeting. Thank you for your.
Take it out in
Sorry.
I can take questions out there.
The FAA said they can take questions out in the crowd. Thank you.
And I appreciate the FAA and also the state DOT. Honest to goodness, we're so glad to bring in some capital for us. Now, as you can see, there are 19 hired guns here tonight, even including the finest possible police officer, which incidentally is the first time I've seen an officer at any of the airport meetings. But these 8 senior citizens that are here are at such a disadvantage. It's David versus Goliath. I plead with the state and the feds to please look into this with a microscope, a magnifying glass, because this is not needed. This airport is only doing 7% of its business.